You are 100% responsible for your life. And this is the number one mistake that poor people are making right now in these inflationary times. If you want to get out of that mindset and want a mindset and practical implementation of growing wealth, even right now with all of this uncertainty that's going on, if you want to understand how the wealthy think, how the wealthy maneuver their money, then carry on watching. I'm not going to do the intro today. Let's get straight into it. So this is 2 weeks old, but this is global central bank policy rates. So what you're seeing is country by country, doesn't matter where you live, the way that wealthy and poor people think is the same. This is the rate, the cash rate or equivalent from the central bank. This is today's or 2 weeks ago's central bank rate. This is the inflation rate that that country is experiencing. And this is the real central bank rate. In other words, the real rate adjusted for inflation. Okay, and what I want to point out, look, this is the crux of the matter, is that interest rates are super low, and I know that rates have gone up by 50 basis points or 0.5% since this point in Australia, 1.35 to 1.85. Really, if you have your money in the bank, you are getting between 0.5 to 1% less than the official cash rate right here. So you're making, let's say, around 1% or less. Okay, CPI, 5.1%. Actually, the latest reading is 6% for headline inflation in Australia. But by and large, the real central bank rate, in other words, the CPI adjusted rate, is negative 3.8. In other words, 1.35 is what you're getting in the bank. You actually get less than that, but let's just go with 1.35. But all of that is eroding because inflation is rising so far ahead of you. And so therefore, you're actually, even with that interest rate, making negative 3 point. You're losing money. Like, that's the point that I'm trying to make. And stick with me. I know this is obvious, but almost all of you, I guarantee, are making this mistake, including me. I make these mistakes too as well. It's like, you're rowing a canoe. You're rowing a canoe upstream. You're rowing really hard. That's the interest rate you're getting. You're getting something, 1%, 0.5%, something in a term deposit, something in a savings account, something. You're rowing, you're rowing, you're rowing. You seem to be edging forward, but the current, the stream, the flow is running against you. And for every row that you're taking and you're perspiring and you're putting so much energy and strength into it, you're going 10 feet backwards. That is the reality right now. That has been the reality for the last 6 months, and that's going to be the reality for probably the next 1 year, 2 years, maybe even 3 years. Who knows, right? We can't anticipate these things. So what am I saying? If you are just saying, look, the world is uncertain, unemployment is low, interest rates are rising, inflation seems to be out of control. What if stagflation comes across? What if the US's technical recession morphs into a real recession? What if that translates over to Australia? What's going to happen? I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to keep my money under the mattress. I'm going to keep my money in the savings account. I'm not going to invest it in anything. Guess what? You've already invested it. You've invested it in depreciating assets, because by you rowing, or worse, not even rowing, you're going so far back because the current is going out. Okay? Time and tide wait for no man. You are 100% responsible for your life. And I get it, right? Like, this is not meant to be some sort of benign motivational talk with no real practical implementation or practical ability to put into practice. I get it. Like, you're seeing all day, every day, you're seeing charts like this where since December 2021, right, the end of last year, to right now, the end of July, many markets across Australia are falling, right? Okay, so let's say this blue line, which is the 5 capital city aggregate, it's come down ever since the first rate rise in May. And that is true for Brisbane as well. That is true for Melbourne. That is true for Sydney. You can see even Brisbane with its huge run up, it's come down. It's starting to plateau, right? So you're thinking, look, Sydney in July had the biggest fall in over 32 years. Melbourne was the second biggest fall. How am I meant to adopt and apply what you're saying, PK? I can't leave my money in the bank. But like, I'm not going to put it in the property market. That's silly. Like, when you look at a chart like this, what do you want me to lose more money than if I had not been rowing at all? Like, what do you want me to do? Like, I hear you. Like, I empathize, I sympathize. I'm in your shoes as well. But I want you to understand two things. The first thing I want you to understand is that retraces in property prices like this, let's say 5%, let's say on a maximum level it goes back 20%, which would be the biggest property crash in more than 60 years. Not out of the cards for Sydney. I'm on record for saying it could go down to 20% less, but it's already risen in many parts of Sydney by more than 40%. All right, so that is one way to contextualize it. But of course, that doesn't help us in what we should invest in, where we should invest in, if we should invest right now. The second point, this is only Sydney, Melbourne. Okay, and Brisbane. Now, if you've been watching my videos, and if you haven't, please go and watch the last 20 or 30. Over the last 6 to 12 months, I've been saying, don't invest in Sydney, don't invest in Sydney, don't invest in Melbourne. None of this is financial advice, right? And in the last 3 or 4 months, you would have heard me saying that, you've done a lot of investing in Brisbane, congratulations, but this is not the time. The point that I'm trying to make is Australia has 15,000 suburbs, and there are areas right now over on the West Coast and South Australia, regional Queensland, other parts of the country that aren't experiencing these types of falls, right? Look, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to spruik anything. We're not going to get 20, 30% capital growth in almost or basically no area across Australia in the next 12 months. Like, I don't want to mislead anyone, but my point is that if you invest wisely, if you invest in a way that you're orientated by data, not this scaremongering, just recently the media is now saying that regional New South Wales is falling. Yeah, like it is falling. Wollongong is technically regional New South Wales, but there are other parts of regional New South Wales that are accelerating. They've also come out and said that this contagion from Sydney, Melbourne, it's going into regional areas, even in Queensland. That's true. Gold Coast has no longer gained price growth in the last 3 months. It's just edged off. The Gold Coast is miles away from a place like Townsville, for instance, right? These are different property. You can't just categorize regional Queensland as one conversation topic. Same with South Australia. So, I made the point that you cannot leave the money in a mattress, in a savings account, in a term deposit right now, because in Australia, you're losing 4% every single year. You might say, okay, well, PK, look, I get what you're saying. I know your channel has a bias because you're naturally trying to sell a property-related product. Like, if I was in your shoes, I'd think the exact same way. So let me be straight with you. You are not going to get tremendous capital growth in this next 12 months, but can you beat inflation by a long way? Yes. And the second thing, the subset I want to say is that if you adopt this mindset, look, I don't want to invest right now. Property markets are crashing. I don't believe you, PK. Everything's going to go to hell. Well, okay, how long are you going to wait? If it goes to hell, you're going to wait 1 year and it still be uncertain. 2 years, still there'll be uncertainty. 3 years, there'll still be uncertainty. At what point will you start investing? Because 3 years from now, your $100,000 in the bank, your $50,000 in the bank, your $500,000 in the bank will be worth 10% less, could be worth 15, even 20% less based on purchasing power, because inflation is eroding your money. Inflation is like termites in a house, right? It's just slowly eating away at your foundation, at your timber structure. And before you know it, 10 years, 20 years has passed and you're like, well, I still got $1 million in the bank. I started off with 900. I still have $1 million, but that million is only worth $700,000 in 10 years ago money. Like, that's the reality. You don't see termites that affect immediately. It takes, months and months and months, sometimes years, for the effect of termites to actually destroy a house. That is what inflation does. Don't let inflation ruin your household finances. Don't let it ruin your passive income goals. Don't let it ruin your retirement, which is, for many of you, probably still 10, 20, 30 years away. You have to get that power of compounding. You have to do something. I don't have all the answers. I'm not a magician. I don't have a crystal ball to say this is the asset class you should put it in. And of course, it always makes sense to have some in fixed income, right? Buffers, some liquid cash, but anyone or everyone who's attained any semblance of real wealth in history globally has not attained it by keeping their money in the bank. And I can tell you right now, for whatever you think of Warren Buffett, he is going on a spending spree. He's splurging like he hasn't in over 2 or 3 years. So when people are fearful, you should be greedy. When people are greedy, you should be fearful. I don't completely agree with that, but I think there's a lot to take away from it. Last thing, I'll just leave with you a quick story, guys. If you're still with me, smash the subscribe button, give it a thumbs up. I'd super appreciate it. The last thing I want to say is, I heard a story where there was a climber, a mountaineer, an adventurer. He was going on a hike, and he was, it was like a multi-day hike. He was climbing this mountain, and it was about 11 p.m. He wanted to finish up for the day, and he had just approached this sort of cliff end. He thought it was a cliff end, and he was completely scared. It started storming, and he couldn't see beyond just 5 paces in front of him, and he thought that was the cliff, and he couldn't go anywhere. It was night. He couldn't go back. He couldn't go sideways, and he was thinking, I'm perspiring. I'm so nervous. What if in the night the storm throws me over the cliff? What if this cliff, is got a 1,000-meter drop right in front of it? What if my belongings, my pack, my gear, what if it tips over the edge in the nighttime when I'm sleeping? There's so much wind howling everywhere. The rain is going sideways. I don't know what I'm doing. He couldn't even sleep that night, right? The whole night he couldn't sleep because he didn't know what would happen if he accidentally went over that cliff. He didn't know the unknown. He was lacking knowledge because it was dark. When he woke up, he found that actually that wasn't a cliff at all. That was just a small sort of indent in the mountain, and actually he peeked over the edge of that cliff, something he was completely afraid to do before in the nighttime. In the morning, he peeked over that cliff and found that actually just a foot below was a huge platform, and the mountain carried on. Okay, it was kind of like this. Okay, so this is a kind of analogy which is like a metaphor. When we don't know what is just over the horizon, what is just 5 paces in front of us, because we're stabbing in the dark. Dark means we don't have knowledge. We're so afraid, and we make wrong decisions. Okay, we're perplexed, we're paralyzed, we're afraid of doing the wrong thing. We do nothing, and that leaves us in a terrible situation, mentally, financially, physically. But when we illuminate ourselves and our environment with knowledge, when we illuminate, we translate, or we transform that night into that day, then we can see something that we were formerly afraid of is actually nothing to be afraid of at all. We have to take risks in life, but with risk comes reward. So I'll leave it there. I mean, I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm trying to spruik everything at all, but you just make up your own mind. But always remember that the 6 inches between your 2 ears are the most important real estate you'll ever own, the most invaluable real estate. Marinate that with knowledge, turn it into intelligence. I'll leave links below to my podcast on Spotify, on Google and Apple Podcasts, and also my Facebook group with more than 20,000 people. These discussions that we have in that Facebook group, they are part of what illuminates the darkness, allows you to make intelligent decisions, because I can tell you right now, property investing makes sense yesterday, makes sense now, makes sense today, and it will beat, done right, it will beat not doing anything. All right, my name's BK. Catch you later, guys. Bye.